All right, so get this. Our deep dive today takes us back to 1971 with a movie review of Pretty Maids All in a Row.
Okay.
And this film is a total genre bender.
Yeah.
It's like teen sex comedy meets murder mystery with a big dose of dark satire.
It's a really fascinating combination.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider who made this film.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Gene Roddenberry.
Oh, wow.
The creator of Star Trek, known for, kind of an optimistic view of the future.
Right.
Teaming up with Roger Vadim.
Okay.
The director of Barbarella, who, had a much more, let's just say, liberated approach to sexuality on film.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And so what happens when these two worlds collide?
Right. What happened?
You get Pretty Maids All in a Row, a film that definitely reflects, the anxieties and the desires of that era.
So set the scene for us.
Oh.
Where does all this craziness take place?
We were at Oceanfront High School in sunny Southern California.
Oh, okay.
So picture it, beaches, surfboards, and, a serial killer targeting beautiful young girls.
Whoa. Oh.
Talk about a clash of tones, right?
Yeah.
It's like a very twisted episode of Beverly Hills 90210.
Dark.
Yeah.
So who are the main players in this bizarre high school drama?
Well, we've got Ponce Harper, your typical hormone-addled teenager.
Okay.
And his guidance counselor, Tiger McDrew.
Okay.
Who is anything but typical.
I'm already sensing a story here.
Oh, there definitely is. And it gets even more interesting when you realize that Tiger McDrew is played by
Oh, come on.
none other than Rock Hudson.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Now, we're used to seeing Hudson as the quintessential romantic lead.
Right.
The epitome of Hollywood charm.
Right.
But here he takes on this much darker, more manipulative role.
Wow.
Yeah. McDrew takes Ponce under his wing.
Okay.
But his mentorship has some seriously unsettling undertones.
Okay.
Yeah, it raises all sorts of questions about power dynamics and exploitation.
It's interesting you mentioned Rock Hudson playing against type. It makes me think about how actors, especially back then, were often typecast.
Yeah.
Can you think of any other actors who made similar dramatic shifts in their careers and really surprised audiences?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, think about Humphrey Bogart.
Oh, yeah.
He started out playing gangsters and tough guys.
Right?
And then he became this iconic romantic lead in films like Casablanca.
Yeah, yeah.
It's fascinating to see how actors can break free from those expectations and, challenge the way that audiences see them.
So we've got Rock Hudson playing this morally ambiguous character
Yes.
in a film that's already mixing genres like crazy.
Yeah.
What's the overall vibe of the film?
Well, that's where things get really tricky.
Okay.
This film is constantly walking a tonal tightrope,
Okay.
jumping between raunchy comedy
Right.
and unsettling moments of suspense.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one minute you're laughing at some awkward adolescent encounter,
Uh-huh.
and the next you're reminded that there's a killer on the loose.
Wild. Can you give a specific example of one of those jarring tonal shifts?
Sure. There's a scene where Ponce is trying to impress a girl by sneaking into the teacher's lounge.
Yeah.
It's played for laughs, very slapstick.
Yeah.
But then right in the middle of this comedic scene, he stumbles upon a clue related to the murders.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly the tone shifts and you're reminded of the dark undercurrent running through the film.
Okay, so it's not just a lighthearted teen comedy.
No.
There's some serious darkness lurking beneath the surface.
Absolutely.
I'm starting to understand why this film might be considered controversial.
Oh, and we haven't even gotten to the film's portrayal of sexual liberation.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, let's just say it hasn't aged gracefully.
Okay.
The teacher-student relationships, the way predatory behavior is almost glorified at times.
Yeah.
It's definitely a product of its time.
Yeah. I can imagine that those elements would raise some eyebrows today.
For sure.
It makes you wonder how audiences reacted to it back in 1971.
It's interesting to think about how societal attitudes towards sex and gender roles have evolved since then.
Right.
What might have been considered edgy or provocative in the 70s could be seen as completely unacceptable today.
Yeah. It's almost like looking into a cultural time capsule.
Yeah.
You get a glimpse of the past, but it's filtered through this layer of, wow, did people really think that was okay?
Right.
Do you think the film's message, if you can even call it that, would resonate differently with audiences today?
Yeah.
Or would it be met with the same level of controversy, if not more?
It's hard to say for sure. I mean, on the one hand, I think the film's, blatant objectification of women and its casual portrayal of predatory behavior would be met with even more outrage today than it was back in 1971.
Yeah, I bet.
Especially in the age of, #MeToo and this heightened awareness of consent.
Right.
those elements would be difficult to ignore or dismiss.
Right, but do you think there's any chance that modern audiences might see past those problematic elements and appreciate the film's attempt at satire?
Perhaps some viewers might recognize it as a critique of the very attitudes it sometimes seems to endorse.
Yeah.
A sort of twisted reflection of the male gaze and the objectification of women that was so prevalent in Hollywood at the time.
Right.
But it's a delicate balance, and I'm not sure the film always gets it right.
It sounds like Pretty Maids All in a Row is a film that really forces you to think critically.
Yeah.
And confront some uncomfortable truths about our cultural history.
Exactly. And it's not just about the film's portrayal of sex and gender roles.
Right.
Remember, this is also a murder mystery.
Yeah.
Albeit one where the whodunit aspect takes a backseat to the characters and their twisted relationships.
Right.
The film touches on themes of power manipulation and the abuse of authority.
Okay.
Themes that are just as relevant today as they were in 1971.
You're right. We see these issues playing out in all sorts of contexts today, from Hollywood to politics to our everyday lives.
Precisely. And while the film's approach may be flawed and even offensive at times, it does force us to confront these uncomfortable realities and ask ourselves how much progress we've really made.
Okay, so we've talked about the film's strange mix of genres, its controversial themes,
Right.
its tonal shifts, its questionable portrayal of sexual liberation.
Yeah.
But what about the pretty maids themselves?
Yeah.
I mean, they're right there in the title.
Right.
What are their roles in all of this?
Sadly, the female characters in the film are largely underdeveloped.
Okay.
They serve more as objects of desire,
Right.
both for the male characters and for the audience, than as fully realized individuals.
That's disappointing, but not entirely surprising, given what we've already discussed about the film's treatment of women.
Yeah.
It seems like they're trapped in this male fantasy world where they're valued primarily for their beauty and their availability.
Exactly. And this reinforces the idea that the film, while perhaps attempting to satirize the objectification of women,
Right.
also participates in that very objectification.
Yeah.
It's a tricky tightrope to walk.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure the filmmakers fully succeed in their intentions.
So we've got this flawed but fascinating film that reflects the anxieties and desires of a very specific time and place.
Right.
But what about its lasting impact?
Yeah.
Is this just a relic of the 70s, or does it have something to say to us today?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
That's what I'm wondering.
Does Pretty Maids All in a Row have any relevance for a modern audience?
What do you think?
I think it does, but perhaps not in the way that the filmmakers intended.
Okay.
For example, the film's exploration of power dynamics and the abuse of authority feels incredibly relevant in today's world.
It's like holding a funhouse mirror up to society.
Yeah.
Reflecting back these distorted, exaggerated versions of our own anxieties and desires.
Yeah.
And even though the reflection might be unsettling, it can still be illuminating.
Exactly. And that distortion, that sense of unease, is what makes Pretty Maids so compelling.
Yeah.
Even if it's occasionally hard to stomach.
Okay, so we've unpacked the plot, the
Yeah.
characters, the themes, the controversy.
Right.
But what about the overall experience?
Yeah.
What did you think of the film as a whole?
It's a strange beast, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It's visually striking,
Okay.
with Claude Renoir's sun-drenched cinematography capturing that classic Southern California aesthetic.
Okay.
And then you have Lalo Schifrin's jazzy score,
Yeah.
which adds another layer of surrealism to the whole thing.
Okay.
Like, the film is constantly playing with your expectations,
Yeah.
keeping you off balance.
It sounds like a sensory overload in the best possible way.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, you mentioned the cinematography and the score,
Yeah.
but the review also mentioned that the film's pacing is a bit all over the place.
Huh.
Like, the murder mystery takes a backseat to these extended scenes of teenage shenanigans.
Yeah.
What did you make of that?
Yeah, the pacing is definitely uneven.
Yeah.
1 minute you're chuckling at some awkward adolescent encounter.
Right.
And the next you're reminded that there's a killer on the loose.
Right.
It's a delicate balance. I'm not sure the film always gets it right.
Yeah.
But maybe that's part of the point.
Yeah.
This deliberate blurring of lines between comedy thriller and social commentary.
You know, you've got a point there.
Yeah.
Maybe the uneven pacing adds to the overall feeling of disorientation and unease.
Right.
It's like the film itself is a reflection of the chaotic and confusing nature of adolescence with all its hormonal surges and conflicting emotions.
Perhaps it's certainly a film that invites multiple interpretations.
You might be surprised to learn that this film is considered a cult classic.
Really?
Why do you think that is?
There's definitely something to be said for films that dare to be different, even if they don't always succeed.
Yeah.
Pretty Maids All in a Row
Hmm.
certainly falls into that category.
Okay.
It's a film that lingers in your mind long after you've seen it,
Yeah.
even if you're not entirely sure why.
It's like a fever dream you can't quite shake.
Exactly.
I think our listeners are definitely up for the challenge of watching this film and forming their own opinions.
I think so, too.
But before they dive into this cinematic rabbit hole,
Yeah.
I think there's one more question we need to tackle.
Okay.
And it's a big one.
I know where you're going with this.
Okay.
You're talking about the film's relevance today.
Uh-huh.
How would Pretty Maids All in a Row be received if it were released in 2023?
Yes.
Would it be met with the same level of controversy, or would it be viewed through a different lens?
Exactly. I mean, we've talked about the film's problematic elements.
Yeah.
But would those be amplified in today's climate?
Yeah.
Or would audiences be more forgiving, understanding it as a product of its time?
It's a tough question. On one hand, we're so much more aware of these issues now.
Right.
But on the other hand, would people be able to separate the art from their artist, so to speak, or to film from the time period?
It's a fascinating thought experiment.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine this film hitting theaters today.
Oh, my God.
The social media firestorm,
Yeah.
the think pieces,
Right.
the heated debates.
It would definitely ignite a conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it would be a productive one.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, some people would probably be outraged, calling for the film to be banned or boycotted.
Right.
Others might defend it as a piece of history, arguing that we can't erase the past, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Right. And then there's the question of artistic intent.
Oh, yeah.
Did the filmmakers set out to make a deliberately provocative film?
Right.
Or were they simply reflecting the prevailing attitudes of their time?
Right.
It's hard to say for sure.
Right.
And I think that ambiguity is part of what makes this film so intriguing.
Yeah.
Even if it's also what makes it so problematic.
Definitely seems like one of those films that sparks more questions than answers. But I guess that's the point of a deep dive, right?
Yeah, I think so.
To get us thinking critically and challenging our own assumptions.
Absolutely. And Pretty Maids All in a Row, despite its flaws, certainly does that.
Right.
It forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our cultural past and to ask ourselves how far we've really come in terms of gender equality and respect for women.
So if you were a filmmaker today tackling similar themes of sexual liberation, power dynamics, and the dark underbelly of seemingly idyllic settings, how would you approach it differently?
That's a great question. I think it's crucial to be mindful of the power dynamics at play,
Okay.
both on screen and off,
Okay.
and to center the stories and experiences of women,
Right.
rather than viewing them through a purely male lens.
That's right. Give the power to the pretty maids, so to speak.
Exactly.
Let them tell their own stories.
Yeah. And I think it's important to approach these themes with nuance and sensitivity,
Okay.
acknowledging the complexities of human relationships and the ways in which power can be both seductive and destructive.
It sounds like a tall order, but I think it's a challenge worth taking on.
I agree.
And who knows, maybe our deep dive into Pretty Maids All in a Row, for all its messiness and controversy, can serve as a starting point for those conversations.
I'd like to think so. After all, the first step towards progress is acknowledging the problems that exist.
Right.
And sometimes the most uncomfortable conversations are the ones that we need to have.
Well said. So to wrap things up, I'd like to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
Imagine you're a filmmaker today, tackling these complex themes.
Yeah.
What would you want to say to a modern audience? How would you navigate the minefield of what's considered acceptable and what's considered offensive in today's world?
Right.
It's a tricky balance, but I think it's a conversation worth having.
I agree. And who knows, maybe someone listening to this deep dive will be inspired to take on that challenge and create a film that sparks meaningful dialogue and pushes us all to think more critically about the world around us.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.